Good evening, everyone. Kalispera σας. I too would like to extend my welcome to Professor Bakoyanni, a visiting scholar. Michaeli, καλώς ήρθες πάλι στο Ελληνικό Κέντρο. Let us begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Before launching into tonight's second seminar, let me give you an update on what's happening in the next 2 weeks, as August is quite an intensive month activities-wise. Firstly, we have next week's seminar at the mezzanine by PhD student Daphne Arapakis, topic being Greek Lives and Indigenous Lands, Collective Responsibility and Ethnic Responses to Australian Colonialism. Our end of August seminar, the 31st of August, will be by Perth-based Dr. John Giannakis, who will be delivering the seminar online from Athens. All of the September seminars, 4 of them, will be held right here at the mezzanine level, so they're all sort of physical seminars. On Monday, the 28th of August, again, Monday evening, at the mezzanine, 7 p.m, we've invited Victorian MP Sheena Watt to come and speak about the voice referendum. On Sunday week, that's the 27th of August, at 4:30 p.m, we have a 3-in-1 event, a lecture, a book launch, and a music performance by Professor Mimios Sophocleos, former head of the Greek program at RMIT in the 90s, who'll be launching a book on Mikis Theodorakis and his links with Cyprus. Furthermore, you've already received a handout at your seats there. There's an event at the Cypriot community of Melbourne, Nicholas Street, that the GCM is sponsoring. It's a book launch and reading of poetry collection of Hope and Love for the Cypriot refugees from Greek poets based in Australia. And last but not least, we have the upcoming film festival in October. The program should be out by the end of the month, but tickets can be purchased for the opening night, which will be screened at both the Astor and the Como Palace Cinemas, and I believe Baldwin as well. Okay, let's get to tonight's seminar, and apologies for the delay. Pyrrhus, the Western Alexander by Dean Kalimniou. Pyrrhus, born around 319 BC, was the Greek king of Epirus and a statesman of the Hellenistic period. In response to congratulations for winning a costly victory over the Romans at the Battle of Asculum, which was fought between Roman legions against Pyrrhus and his mainly Macedonian army, Pyrrhus is reported to have said, "If we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined." The term Pyrrhic victory in daily discourse has therefore come to signify a victory that was won at such a cost that it loses all its worth. The Carthaginian general Hannibal ranked him as one of the greatest commanders the world has ever seen. And to deliver tonight's seminar, we have a man who wears many hats, or should I say many helmets, based on tonight's topic, Dean Kalimniou, poet, writer, lawyer, activist, και πολλά άλλα πράγματα. Give him a topic and he'll find a Greek angle or Greek dimension to it, so that's why he's a regular at this series. His breadth of knowledge knows no bounds. During the last few years, Dean has also experimented with writing children's books, more specifically bilingual children's books. His first one, Sumela and the Magic Gemenje, came out last year before COVID. There's still copies at the back at the bookshop. And there's another one in the pipeline for 2024, The Librarian from Cappadocia, if I recall. Dean, best of luck with all your future endeavours, and great to have you back presenting. Big round of applause for our speaker tonight.
How can one follow on from the amazing lecture by Mr. Bakoyannis before? He was speaking about the Civil War, and I'm here to tell you that the Greek condition is one of perennial civil war. So we're going to talk tonight about Pyrrhus, the king of Epirus, who lived at a time when basically Έλληνες σκοτώνονταν μεταξύ τους. What's new? So I think there are 2 things that you need to know about him. I'll be speaking in English, so apologies to those who are not happy with that, but what can I do? Αυτό μου είπα να κάνω, αυτό θα κάνω. As Nick said, he gave his name to the expression Pyrrhic victory, Pyrrhus Niki, yeah? Where you have a technical victory, but it counts at a loss because the effort expended in getting this victory and the carnage is so great that it's not worth it, and I think that encapsulates the whole history of the Greek left exactly. Secondly, he's the first documented ranger in Greek history, And for those of you watching at home who are not au fait with the Australian patois, as it's spoken in Melbourne, this means the first Greek redhead. Yeah? Pyrrhus meaning red-haired or flame-coloured. Pyrrhus was also used as an alternate name for Neoptolemos, the son of Achilles, and also Princess Didamia in Homeric Greek mythology. So the dynastic line of this family of Pyrrhus is said to have come from the heir kids, and we don't really know if he's really had red hair or not, or whether this was just a deliberate attempt to highlight the continuation of the line, that he belonged to the line of Pyrrhus, Neoptolemos, and Achilles. It would be kind of funny if he didn't have red hair and he was called Ranga, but I stress that Epirus has the highest incidence of red-haired people in all of Greece, and this is probably due to less levels of vitamin D historically, because they're up in the mountains. But anyway, that's going into social Darwinism, and we're not allowed to talk about that anymore. So why Pyrrhus? And here he is on his high horse. First of all, one of the great generals of antiquity. Second, someone who almost united all of Greece. Πού είναι αυτός ο ηγέτης που θα ενώσει όλους τους Έλληνες? Well, he gave it a go. Whether they liked it or not, mind you, and most didn't like to be united. And thirdly, he was one of the first Greeks to view the ascent of Rome as a problem. And also, for me, he's one of the most fascinating and enigmatic figures of Greek history. Indeed, I would say the quintessential Greek, or katexochine Έλληνας, incredibly gifted, with huge potential, but ultimately let down by the size of, here he's on a chocolate box, ultimately let down by the size of his ego, which was of epic proportions. Archaeologists are still trying to measure it, but of course it's not the size that counts, it's what you do with the ego. So let's begin by saying that there were three main tribes of Epirotes: the Molossians in central Epirus, the Chaonians in what is called geographically northern Epirus, and the Thesproti in southern Epirus, southwestern Epirus. So Pyrrhus's people were the Molossians. He was the king of the Molossian kingdom. Aristotle said that Hellas was located around Dodoni, which was the center of Molossia, and names like Greki, Hellenes come from this area. And Pyrrhus's family dynasty was the first dynasty to create a centralized state in Epirus around about 370 BC, expanding their power against rival associations and brotherhoods, rival tribes. So the heir kids allied themselves with Macedon, and in part because the Illyrians up north were raiding both kingdoms. And we know that the Molossian princess, so that's Molossia there on the map. There's also a micronation called Molossia, one of those nations that are created on the internet. So there's a micronation with a guy that looks like Juan Perón pretending to be king of Molossia, but that has nothing to do with this, or maybe it does. I think that the various nomarchias in Epirus look a lot like him. So yes, Olympias, sister of Arivas of Epirus, married who else but King Philip II of Macedon, the father of Alexander the Great. So Alexander and Pyrrhus were cousins, which is why the Albanians claim Alexander as their own, and they seem to think that the ancient Epirotes were Albanian. And does that remind you of anyone? I don't know, but that's a statue of Pyrrhus in Albania, as you can tell by the outstretched hand. Now we know in 319 BC, Pyrrhus was born to Prince Eakidis of Epirus and Phthia, a Thessalian noblewoman, the daughter of the Thessalian general Menon. Eakidis supported Olympias, the mother of Alexander, in her fight against Cassander. As we know, after Alexander died, everything went to the proverbial, and there were fights all over the Hellenistic world. So he marches on Macedon. In 317 BC, when Pyrrhus was only 2, Olympias requests his support, and he marched on Macedon a second time. Many of his soldiers didn't like being in Macedonia, and who can blame them? And they mutinied. So Achilles releases the soldiers from the army, but as a result, this army was too small to achieve anything When the mutineers arrive in Epirus, they cause a rebellion against their king. So Eakidis is dethroned. Cassander, the ruler of Macedonia, sends one of his generals, Lykiskos, to act as a regent, and they install Pyrrhus's brother Neoptolemus as the king. Pyrrhus's family flees north and takes refuge with Gelafkias of the Talandians, and that's one of the largest Illyrian tribes. So Pyrrhus is raised by Veria, Gelafkias' wife, who is also a Molossian of the dynasty. So he's raised by his aunt in what is now modern-day Albania. Cassander marches against Gelafkias because we don't want any pretenders to the throne to be alive, defeats his army, and captures the city of Apollonia. That's an infant Pyrrhus at the kingdom of Gelafkias. Gelafkias promises never to take arms against Macedonia, but he refuses to give up Pyrrhus and his family, which is nice. By 313 BC, Cassander is distracted by his war against Antigonos Monophthalmos. That's Antigonos the One-Eyed. See, we invented Collingwood supporters. One of the most powerful of the Diadochi. Fearing an invasion from Asia Minor, where Antigonos was building up his forces as you do, he shifts his attention from the west to the east. That's him, but with two eyes, so I don't know what happened there. Eakidis takes advantage of the situation, returns to Epirus. There's going to be a lot of this going back and forth, so sorry. He regains popularity and raises an army. Cassander sends an army under his brother Philip, who defeats Eakidis in 2 battles. Eakidis is wounded and dies. Now we come to the first reign of Pyrrhus. This is where it all begins. So in 307 BC, Gelafkias of the Illyrians invades Epirus and puts Pyrrhus on the throne. Pyrrhus is only 11 years old, so his guardians rule in his stead until he came of age, which, as you know, if you are Greek and you are young, your guardians will rule in your stead until you're at least 63. When he's 17, he travels to the court of Gelafkias in Illyria to attend the wedding of one of Gelafkias' sons. While he's in Illyria, the Molossians rose in rebellion and drove out Pyrrhus' supporters and returned Neoptolemus to the throne. And the moral of this story, for all of you here, puiste proedri, or something like that, important in the Greek community, never go on holidays while leaving your rivals at home. When you go to Greece, make sure everyone goes to Greece with you. Otherwise, τελείωσε το προεδρηλίκι. So, Pyrrhus travels to the Peloponnese and serves with his brother-in-law Dimitrios Poliorkitis. Now, that's Gelafkias, that's Poliorkitis. Poliorkitis is an interesting guy who I'd love to talk about, but we haven't got time. But one of the interesting things he did was he was said to have run a brothel out of the back of the Parthenon. I don't know how that would have worked, and I think that, you know, all of these new cement driveways and things that they've discovered are from that era. And he had married Pyrrhus' sister, so they were all mates and they were campaigning against Cassander, as you do. And in 302, the said Demetrios, the brothel owner, takes his army to Asia Minor to support his father Antigonos, the one-eyed Collingwood supporter. Pyrrhus told Antigonos that, give me a go. He impresses Antigonos. Antigonos says that Pyrrhus would become the greatest general of all time if he lived long enough, which has been said about many presidents of Greek organizations. Now, this is where things get complex, so bear with me. Antigonos grew too powerful, and what happens when a Greek becomes too powerful? The other successors, the other year of Alexander the Great, Seleucus, Lysimachos, Ptolemeos, Kassandros, unite against him. Lysimachos and Seleucus, reinforced by 2 of Cassander's armies, had concentrated their forces in Asia Minor, and they march on Antigonos. Both armies meet in Ipsus in Phrygia. No, the expression, the Phrygians, comes from them. And they spoke a Thracian kind of language, which is related, people think, to Proto-Armenian. The Battle of Ipsos, which is what you see there, was the largest and most important battle of the wars of the successors of Alexander the Great. Pyrrhus fought with Demetrios on the right wing, which is considered the place of honour. and made a brilliant display of valour among the combatants. And despite these efforts, Antigonos lost both the battle and his life. Demetrios, however, was victorious on his wing, and he took his 9,000 men with Pyrrhus and ran away from the battle. Pyrrhus continued to serve under his brother-in-law as they started rebuilding Antigonos's empire. Importantly enough, during all of these squabbles between the Diadochi, the successors of Alexander the Great, what we call the Epigoni as well, Epirus managed to maintain more or less independent, whether that's because no one wanted the place or it was due to skillful manoeuvring by the Epirotes, it's a fact. So, in 298 BC, Pyrrhus was taken hostage to Alexandria under the terms of a peace treaty made between Demetrios and Ptolemeus I, known as Sotir or Sotiras. There he marries Ptolemy's stepdaughter Antigone, and in 297 BC, Cassandros dies, and Ptolemy, always looking for allies, decides to restore Pyrrhus to his kingdom. Off you go to Epirus and remember me and do me a favour. There will come a time, and maybe that time will be later on, when I'll ask for a favour and I'll expect it to be done. He gives him men, arms, money, sends him back where he came from. Now begins the second reign of Pyrrhus. So Pyrrhus returns to Epirus at the head of an army, but not willing to fight a civil war against his brother. He says, let's sit down. No? Kind of like brothers do when they're at odds about their parents' periusia after their mum and dad have died. You know, you take the unit at the back, I'll take the one at the front. What are we going to do with the shop on High Street in Paran? They worked it out, yeah? And then the two kings started to plot against each other because there is no such thing as shared leadership in the Greek zeitgeist. Anyone who tells you otherwise, all this burdas about collective leadership, doesn't win you elections. And I'm referring to some people in this room. Now, Pyrrhus was informed of a plot against his life and decided to strike first, which is logical. He invites his fellow king and brother to dinner and had him murdered. Yeah? And the act does not appear to have been unpopular, as Epirus' nobility were devoted to him, and it put them off their kleftiko. So in 295 BC, Pyrrhus transfers his capital of his kingdom to Ambrakia. So we're talking the southern point of Epirus. In 292 BC, he goes to war against his former ally and brother-in-law, Demetrios, because as you know, Greeks never talk to their brother-in-laws. So why should Pyrrhus be any different? He invades Thessaly while Demetrios is besieging Thebes. So Demetrios responds immediately, and he leaves the siege to his son Antigonos Gonatas and marches back north at the head of an army. What we're seeing here, the ruins of Ambrakia, the ancient capital of Pyrrhus, that's the theatre, yeah? So while he's back in Epirus, Pyrrhus suffers another setback. His second wife, Lanasa, daughter of Agathocles of Syracuse in Sicily, deserts him. She claims that she, being a daughter of a Greek king, the king of Sicily, yeah, could no longer bear to share her throne and her home with barbarian women, and them's fighting words. So she flees to Kerkyra with her dowry and offers it and herself to Demetrios. Yeah, she left him for her brother-in-law. How many times have we spoken about these things during Yortes and whatever? You know. So he accepts, sails to the island, takes possession of both Kerkyra and Lanasa, because as we know, possession is 9/10 of the law. Now, Demetrios strikes back. After returning to his army in mainland Greece, Demetrios plans to invade Epirus. I've taken the wife, I've taken the prika, now I'm going to take everything else. Yeah? In 200, but Pyrrhus started it, obviously. In 289 BC, he invaded Pyrrhus's allies, the Aetolian League. You know, there's Aetolian College, the school. This is the Aetolian League, which is Aetolia. It's a region in central Greece. Hoping to neutralize them before they invade Epirus, the Aetolians refused battle and retreated into the hills. After ransacking the countryside of the region, Demetrius leaves a strong force under his general Pandavkos in Aetolia and marches on Epirus. Meanwhile, Pyrrhus has raised an army and was marching to the rescue of the Aetolian allies. The two armies are traveling on different roads. They pass each other, and Demetrius starts plundering Epirus, and Pyrrhus meets Pandavkos in a battle. Now, Pyrrhus has got about 20,000 people with him, which is amazing for the time, because I don't think there are that many people who live in Epirus today, but that's beside the point. What we know what happened in Epirus was that the Romans invaded and took everyone hostage and sent them as slaves back to Rome. That's what the historians tell us. That's a lot later on, and the region never recovered population-wise, but that's another story. So they're fighting, and it's a massive fight between Pyrrhus's army and Pandavkos' army until Pyrrhus says, you know what, let's settle this the old-fashioned way. You and me, mano a mano, one-on-one. Let's, come on, big boy, outside. And they do. So they hurl spears at each other, because that's how it starts, you know, bang, bang. And then they fought out, then they get their swords out, and then they're fighting with swords. It's all very macho, and all very testosterone-driven. And Pyrrhus is wounded, but then he wounds Pandavkos in the thigh and in the neck. And his bodyguards have to carry him away. So technically, Pyrrhus has won, and his army takes heart, and it causes them to break Pandavkos' army, taking 5,000 prisoners. And at this stage, the army, which liked this one-on-one brawl, bestow Pyrrhus the honour of the name Eagle, which we don't get because they weren't flying, they were on the ground throwing stuff at each other, but lack of imagination, these Epirotes. Demetrius, upon hearing Pyrrhus' victory, marches back to Macedon. Pyrrhus releases his prisoners, so what the hell was that for? And marches back to Epirus in time for round 3. Ding, ding. We need some sound effects, Nico. In 289 BC, Pyrrhus learns that Demetrius is ill and invades Macedonia. Never get coronavirus if you've got rivals, that's all I have to say. His original intention was merely to raid and pillage, as you do, but with Demetrius unable to lead his forces, he met no opposition. Pyrrhus penetrates as far as the old Macedonian capital of Aegia before Demetrius was well enough to take the field. And then when Demetrius gets better, he arrives with his army, and what does Pyrrhus do? He gets up and leaves. Demetrius, we have to say, was just as hyperactive as Pyrrhus. Like, I'm getting tired even talking about this. He planned to invade Asia and retake his father's domains. So he decides to make peace with Pyrrhus, whose guts he hated, by granting him holdings in Macedonia. So I'll give you some land in Macedonia, but I'm keeping Kerkyra and I'm keeping Lefkada because I like Portokatsiki. And then he starts to raise a vast army and a huge fleet. Now, faced with this threat, the other great epigoni of Alexander the Great, Lysimachos, Ptolemeus, and Seleucus, ally against him. And the 3 kings send embassies to Pyrrhus saying, look, you know, just come onto our side, we'll look after you, we'll give you what you want. Stuff Demetrius, you never liked him anyway. And he's taken your wife, and he's taken your prika, and all that. And the whole idea is that if the allies won and Pyrrhus remained neutral, he would gain nothing. On the other hand, if Demetrius won and was victorious, he would overwhelm Pyrrhus any time in the future. So Pyrrhus' personal enmity against Demetrius probably tipped the scales in favour of him joining the allies against Demetrius after making peace with him. Yeah? This is more complicated than Julia Charpandidou's book about the history of the Kinotita and all the fights that happened, so sorry about that. In 288 BC, the allied kings begin their fight against Demetrius. Ptolemy from Egypt sails against Demetrius' Greek allies with a large fleet. Lysimachos invades Macedonia from Thrace. Pyrrhus waits until Demetrius has marched against Lysimachos in Thrace and then invades southern Macedonia. And we wonder why Demetrius would have been so silly as to leave his flank open the way he did, but somehow, after stealing his wife and stealing Kerkyra, Demetrius felt that he could trust Pyrrhus, which says a lot for the guy, yeah? And Pyrrhus takes western and southern Macedonia without a struggle. Meanwhile, Demetrius wins a victory against Lysimachos near Amphipolis. And when the Macedonian army hears that their homeland was overrun by Pyrrhus, they turn on Demetrius. What kind of leader are you? What's this rubbish? They're sick of his autocratic rule, they're sick of his grandiose plans, and refuse to advance any further. So Demetrius then leads his army against Pyrrhus, probably hoping that the Macedonians would be more willing to fight a foreign invader rather than Lysimachos, who was a veteran of Alexander and a Macedonian. Unfortunately for Demetrius, his troops were just so fed up with him that they deserted to Pyrrhus, and he had to flee, so he runs away. Lysimachos is then joined by Pyrrhus, and they decide to share rulership over Macedonia, like a dual presidency kind of thing. Now, Kavafi describes Demetrius Poliorkitis abandoning the throne of Macedonia to Pyrrhus of Epirus in these terms. This is an English translation. He took off his golden robes, threw away his purple buskins, it's leggings, yeah, and quickly dressing himself in simple clothes, he slipped out, just like an actor who, when the play is over, changes his costume and goes away. Now, you've seen him exit stage left, pursued by a bear. The return of Demetrius. Demetrius goes off and gathers a new army in Greece and besieges Athens, which had rebelled against the puppet government he had installed. The Athenians say, Pyrrhus, come and help us. We've got Demetrius at our gates. And he marches against Demetrius, and this causes Demetrius to raise the siege of Athens. And the Athenians thank Pyrrhus by erecting a bust to him and allowing him into the city for celebrations. But they would not allow his army to enter the city, fearing that Pyrrhus would install a garrison and make himself overlord of Athens, which was a wise decision. And Pyrrhus laughs and grins and pretends that he doesn't know what they're up to and says, do you know what you did was a good idea. You should never, ever, ever let a king enter Athens ever again, which is something that when the Glucksberg came along, they completely forgot, but that's a long time later. So Pyrrhus and Demetrius kiss and make up, but like all previous agreements, didn't last. In 286, Demetrius again invades Asia in order to attack Lysimachos, who's installed there. And Lysimachos says to Pyrrhus, can you invade Thessalia? And from there attack Demetrius's possessions in Greece. And Pyrrhus says, well, you know what, I've got all these Macedonian troops under my control now, and they're annoying and belligerent, and I've got to keep them busy, and probably it'll be easy to win anyway, so off we go. He defeats Antigonos Gonatas, who is Demetrius' son, who then cedes all of Thessaly to him in order to make peace, including Τον Κόμβο της Viokarpet, where all the strikes take place. And Pyrrhus' Greek empire is now at its zenith. He rules over an enlarged Epirus, half of Macedonia and Thessaly, which is why the Tsamika you hear in Grevena, Metsovo and Trikala are so similar. It's because of that. Now, in 285 BC, Demetrius was defeated by Seleucus, who's over in Asia and in Syria and these places. And that means that Lysimachos, who's waiting around the corner, says, that's it, now we can get rid of this guy. He isolates Pyrrhus from his traditional ally, which is the Ptolemies of Egypt, by marrying Arsinoi, the sister of Ptolemeos Philadelphos, the brother lover. He also made a large donation, hey, love is love. He also made a large donation to the Aetolians, who are Pyrrhus's main allies in Greece. What's the best way of creating allies where none exist? You tell them that if they're Greek, you tell them that they're brilliant and beautiful, and you give them money. Multicultural funding, amazing stuff. So probably they used it to fix their toilets in their club room. Pyrrhus feels threatened enough to make an alliance with Antigonos Gonatas. You know, that's the guy he defeated in Thessaly and took Thessaly off him. Lysimachos then invades Pyrrhus's half of Macedonia with a vast army, and unable to stand up to Lysimachos's superior forces, Pyrrhus retreats and links up with his erstwhile enemy Antigonos Gonatas, son of his archenemy Demetrius. And then Lysimachos starts what is probably the first propaganda campaign in history. And he says to his people, why are you to the Macedonians fighting under Pyrrhus, why are you working for this Epiroti? Come back and work for me. Us Macedonians, we'll do it all right. We're not like them. We're like us, and we're different and separate. And these are words that have been thrown back in our faces by our northern neighbours for a long time since. So, the campaign is successful though. The Macedonian troops turn against Pyrrhus, and Pyrrhus does what Pyrrhus does. He returns to Epirus and sulks, and then decides not to oppose Lysimachos for a whole year because then he had to fight a war against the Illyrians in the north. At this time, according to the historian Pausanias, Pyrrhus was roaming around as usual. He's a very peripatetic guy. Now we enter the new chapter in the saga, which is called The Struggle with Rome. So there's a Greek, there he is there. There's a Greek city of Tarentum, in southern Italy, which fell out with Rome because apparently there was a deal with the Romans that the Romans were not supposed to send warships into the Tarentine Gulf, kind of like the Chinese aren't supposed to send warships into the economic zone of the sea where the Philippines are and Vietnam, but hey. Then in 282 BC, the Romans install garrisons in the Greek cities of Thurii, Locri and Rhegion and send warships to Thurii, which is a no-no. And although this was designed as a measure against the Italian peoples of Lucania, which is where we get Lucanico from, and that's not a joke, that's true, the Tarentines grew nervous and attacked the Romans in Thurii, and they threw the Roman garrison out of the city and sunk various Roman warships. And now Tarentum was now faced with a Roman attack and certain defeat unless they could get someone to weigh in and help them. So Rome was already a major power and was poised to subdue all the Greek cities of Magna Graecia. And the Tarentines say, well, what do we do? There's this guy roaming around all of Greece called Pyrrhus, and he attacks everyone, and he seems to be a bulldog, and we'll just get him. And Pyrrhus says, I don't know if I want to take on this job. I don't know anything about Italy. It's far. They eat spaghetti there. I don't know. Goes to the Oracle of Delphi, and the Oracle says, you know what? If you go there, you will be crowned with glory. It's not a bad thing. So I can make an empire of myself there. It'll be good. Kick out the Romans. Makes an alliance with Ptolemy Geravnos, the king of Macedon, the thunderbolt, and then says, okay, I've got all of that worked out. Off to Italy in 280 BC. So he enters Italy with an army consisting of 20,000 infantry, 3,000 cavalry, 2,000 archers, 500 slingers, and 20 war elephants. The elephants had been loaned to him by Ptolemy II Philadelphus of Egypt, who had also promised 9,000 soldiers and a further 50 elephants to defend Epirus while Pyrrhus and his army were away. So, and this was the first time that elephants appeared on Roman soil. They had never seen these things before, and obviously they are the tanks of the time. And there they are, being used for the purposes that they were used for. Now, a bit of an aside, Kineas of Thessaly was a philosopher, a diplomat, and an advisor to King Pyrrhus of Epirus. And Plutarch wrote that prior to Pyrrhus going to Italy, Kineas tried to dissuade him from waging war with Rome. He said, you know, you should be happy with what you've already got. And he asked Pyrrhus a series of questions. He said, how would you use a victory against the Romans, and what would you do after you take over Italy? And would your expedition stop with taking Sicily? Because apparently Pyrrhus wanted to take Sicily as well as mainland Italy. And since Pyrrhus then had told him that after he had finished that, he was going to take Libya and Carthage so that no enemies who threatened him would offer further resistance, he said, what would you do when everything you have becomes subject to us? And the reply of Pyrrhus to the last question was, well, you know what, once we finish and we take over the world, Lebensraum, we shall be much at ease, and we will drink, my good man, every day, and we will gladden each other's hearts with confidential talks, which is Shakespearean for pigadaki and kutsubolio. And Kineas said, okay, έδωσε θέλω μάγκα. Surely this privilege is ours already, and we have at hand, without taking any trouble, those things that we hope to attain by bloodshed and great toils and perils, after doing much harm to others and suffering much ourselves. To which Pyrrhus said, Άντα από εδώ μωρή. Now, due to his superior cavalry, his elephants and his deadly phalanx infantry, he defeats the Romans. They were led by a guy called Consul Publius Valerius Laevinus, not Decimus Maximus, that was a lot later, in the Battle of Heraclea in 280 BC, in the Roman province of Lucania, whence we derive, as we said, the Lucanico. Several tribes, including the Lucanians, the Bruti, the Messapians, and the Greek cities of Croton and Locri joined Pyrrhus. There's like, the Romans are our enemy, you are our friend, off we go. Then he offers the Romans a peace treaty, and the Romans say, no, we don't do this peace thing. You're either with us or against us. And the Pyrrhus tries to wrest Campania from the Romans, and then Laevinus thwarts him in that, so no good. Enjoy a picture of Pyrrhus wearing a bedsheet while I'm talking. Has nothing to do with the text, but I thought you might like it. He then boldly marched on Rome itself, but found its defences too formidable, couldn't take over Rome. Meanwhile, the Romans made peace with the Etruscans up in the north, and they recalled their other consul, whose name was Tiberius Coruncanius. And he's marching down south from Etruria, where Florence is today, towards Rome. Now, Pyrrhus is facing three armies: the garrison of Rome, Lavinius from the south, Coruncanius from the north, and he says, bugger, what do? I'm going to go to Tarentum, and I'm going to winter my troops, and I'm going to hide, basically, and mass for the counter of attack. Then he decides to invade Apulia, in 279 BC, and the two armies meet in the Battle of Asculum, where Pyrrhus won the costly victory. The consul Publius Decius Mus was the Roman commander, and while his force was ultimately defeated, they almost managed to break the back of Pyrrhus's army, thus guaranteeing the security of Rome itself. The Romans lost 6,000 men, and Pyrrhus lost 3,500 men, including many of his best officers, and that's where he said famously, which Nick you should offer spoiler alerts. I'm not sure anyone has heard of the Pyrrhian victory, Pyrrhic victory, He said, if we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined. I don't think he used the word ruined, but anyway, that's what they wrote down in the text. It's from these reports that the semi-legendary event that the Pyrrhic victory term originates. Now, ruler of Sicily. In 278 BC, Pyrrhus receives two offers simultaneously, and it's good to have choices. We're all about choices here. Choices are great for the consumer and the investor. The Greek cities in Sicily ask him to come and drive out Carthage, which is a Phoenician city. Phoenicians, the Semitic people, related to the ancient Assyrians, speaking a similar language, and the Hebrews, which, along with Rome, was one of the two great powers of the Western Mediterranean. At the same time, the Macedonians, whose King Ptolemy Keravnos had been killed by the invading Gauls. The Gauls are obviously a Celtic people that rampaged through Greece and ended up in Asia Minor, in the area which we now call Galatia, near Angira. Asked Pyrrhus to ascend the throne of Macedon. So Pyrrhus says, okay, Macedon, Sicily, Macedon, seriously, has anyone ever been to Sicily and Macedonia? Give me Sicily any day, guys, sorry, but Sicily, it's Sicily. He says, I'm going to Sicily. And similar decisions have been tried to be made by past presidents of Pan Mac, but they were stopped by the Florinians. That's another story, we won't talk about that. In 278 BC, after disembarking in Sicily, he lifts the Carthaginian siege of Syracuse. They were investing the city. Pyrrhus is proclaimed king of Sicily. He was already making plans for his son Elenos, a grandson of Agathocles of Syracuse through his mother, to inherit the kingdom of Sicily, and his other Alexander to be given Italy. So it was that dynastic thing, I'm going to strategically place my sons in all the kingdoms so that I get votes in the UN. Now, in 277 BC, Pyrrhus captures Eryx, the strongest Carthaginian fortress in Sicily, and this prompts the rest of the Carthaginian forces to say, you know what, that's it. All right, Pyrrhus, you're the man. And the Carthaginians originally from Lebanon, one thing we know about Lebanese civil war and Lebanese in general is that they always submit to the strongest for the time being. Yeah, that's what happened there. So in 276 BC, Pyrrhus negotiates with the Carthaginians and they say, look, we'll come to terms, we'll give you money, we'll send you ships, and once they do that, he says, look, that's great, and thank you for being nice to me, but I want you to get the hell out of Sicily, and the Libyan Sea will be the boundary between me and you. And the Greek cities of Sicily say, look, we don't want to make peace. Why are you doing this? Why are you making peace with these Carthaginians? They still control the city of Lilybaeum in the west of Sicily, and that's a problem. And Pyrrhus says, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't think about that. Didn't think it through. So no, sorry, we're going to have a peace treaty, but now we're not. We're going to go back to what we were doing before. And he goes and besieges Lilybaeum. You know, it's like the carbon credits, how we're going to have them, then we didn't, something like that. So for 2 months, he launches unsuccessful assaults against the city of the Carthaginians until he realizes that this is not going to work. I need a blockade by sea as well. Pyrrhus then requests manpower and money and ships from the Sicilians in order to construct a powerful fleet. And the Sicilians said, what? You're defending us and you want money and you want ships and you want help? That wasn't the deal. And Pyrrhus is getting nowhere and he can't enforce discipline. And what happens when a Greek who is powerful can't enforce discipline and people aren't listening to him anymore? He establishes a military dictatorship in Sicily, yeah? And installs military garrisons in the Sicilian cities for their own good, of course. Now, these actions were deeply unpopular, and Sicilian opinion became inflamed against him, and Pyrrhus had so alienated the Sicilian Greeks that they were willing to make common cause with their enemies, the Carthaginians, because that's just how we Greeks roll. Yeah? And the Carthaginians like, great, this is great, you know, I'm going to send another army up against you, and this time it's going to have your own people in there. But that army was defeated. But despite Pyrrhus beating this army, Sicily is growing increasingly hostile to Pyrrhus, who says, you know what, I've had enough of this bugger Sicily, I'm going to go. I don't want this. And at this point, the Samnites, who are a group of people in south-central Italy, and the Tarentine envoys reach Pyrrhus and go, what are you doing? What are you doing? Out of all of the cities in mainland Italy that you had taken, only Tarentum has not been conquered by Rome. You're off doing whatever you are doing with the Carthaginians, and Rome's taken over everything. What the hell are you doing? And Pyrrhus says, all right, I'm going. So he leaves Sicily and abandons it. No staying power, this guy. And as his ship leaves the island, he turns around and he says something prophetic which foreshadows the Punic Wars. I remember when I was doing archaeology at Melbourne Uni, we had a lecturer with a speech impediment who talked about the Pubic Wars, but it's either that or I was in the wrong class. And he says to his companions, what a wrestling ground we're leaving, my friends, for the Carthaginians and the Romans. And of course, we know that later on Rome destroyed Carthage and their empire. So while his army is being transported by ship to mainland Italy, Pyrrhus's navy was destroyed by the Carthaginians at the Battle of the Strait of Messina, with 98 warships sunk or disabled out of 110, which was really annoying because they didn't have any Collins-class submarines and his insurance policy didn't cover wars. Now, plus the submarine windows didn't have locks on them, and that's important. Retreat from Italy. While Pyrrhus is campaigning against the Carthaginians, the Romans had rebuilt their army, and they're back with a vengeance. Pyrrhus returns from Sicily. He finds himself vastly outnumbered against the superior Roman army under Manius Curius Dentatus, whose name literally means the toothy one, the one with teeth. So after the inconclusive Battle of Beneventum in 275 BC, Pyrrhus decides to end his campaign in Italy and return to Epirus, which resulted in basically the loss of essentially everything he achieved in Italy. The city of Tarendum, you'll be pleased to know, remained under the dominion of the Epirotes, and we've been claiming it ever since. Okay, now we're approaching the end. So the Western campaign in Italy was a complete waste of time. Greeks have no business taking on the Italians in their homeland. We only do that when we're in the mountains of Epirus, if you pardon the pun. And that's why we took great delight in defeating the Italians in Epirus in 1940, because Pyrrhus left unfinished business. Now, despite or because of this, Pyrrhus went to war again, because as our American cousins teach us, one way of balancing the budget is to plunder other countries. Great economics. Now, the realm of his rival king, Antigonus Gonatas of Macedon, was the most obvious target. Pyrrhus raises an army from his Epirot garrisons, Gallic mercenaries, and the troops he had brought back from Italy, and he marches east into Macedonia, and he wins an easy victory and takes over most of Macedon. Antigonus holds on to some of the coastal cities, then he waits for an opportunity to reclaim the kingdom, while Pyrrhus is already looking for another water fight. And Pyrrhus makes himself very unpopular in Macedon by allowing his Gauls to plunder the tomb of the Macedonian kings in Aegae, which was very galling, if you pardon the pun, because as we know, the French are bloody insufferable when they're on holidays. Now, in 272 BC, Cleonymos, a royal Spartan who was hated among his other fellow Spartans, says to Pyrrhus, you know what, they hate me, these Spartans do, so I want you to attack Sparta and put me in power and I'll show them who's boss. So Pyrrhus agrees to the plan, attempting to win control of the Peloponnese. He says, I'm going to put you on the throne of Sparta, but you're going to be my puppet. You're going to do what I say. But then encounters unexpected strong resistance. On the retreat, he loses his firstborn son Ptolemaeus, who had been in command of the rear guard, and that affects him greatly. But he had little time to mourn because he was immediately offered an opportunity to intervene in a civic dispute in Argos. Since Antigonus Gonatas was approaching too, he said, no, I'm going to get into the city by stealth, I'm just going to creep in there. But once he did, the city was crowded with hostile troops. He's like, oh bugger. So there's a battle in Argos, and in the narrow streets, Pyrrhus is trapped. And while he's fighting, an Argive soldier, the soldier's old mother, who's on top of the roof looking down at him, says, you know, leave my son alone. She grabs a roof tile and she throws it on his head. And that's how we get the Greek-Australian expression, rufiana. Yeah, she's on the roofie, rufiana. Yeah, that's Greek-Australian. Throws a tile, knocks him over, and then breaks part of his spine, paralyzes him, and then a Macedonian soldier called Epirus goes and chops his head off. And this story is, we get this story from Plutarch. He's in his Life of Pyrrhus. So Antigonus has him cremated with all honours, and you give him honours because you thank the gods that he's dead, and sends his surviving son Helenus back to Epirus. And then the same year, upon hearing the news of Pyrrhus' death, the Tarentians surrender to Rome. So that's a medieval French manuscript which shows the death of Pyrrhus with a roof tile falling there. Very popular figure in medieval times. Now, in the Life of Pyrrhus, which Plutarch wrote, he records that, and Nick said this as well, spoiler alert, that Hannibal ranked him as one of the greatest commanders of all time. And he was a mercurial and often restless leader, but even though he was not always a wise king, didn't make the best decisions, he was a really, really, really good fighter. And he was known for his benevolence. As a general, Pyrrhus' greatest political weaknesses were his failure to maintain focus and to maintain a strong treasury at home. But he really looked after his soldiers, he cared for his men, and that's why they were willing to follow him up and down the length and breadth of Greece pointlessly, because he inspired them. Now, the concept of a monarch having a touch that could heal all wounds, and this was something that persisted until the medieval times, you know, this idea that the king could touch you and you would heal scrofula and other diseases, probably originated with Pyrrhus. So Pliny the Elder states that Pyrrhus' great toe on his right foot cured diseases, and that was the fungus toe, diseases of the spleen, merely by touching the patient. And his toe also could not be burnt. So when he was cremated, his toe was put in a special box and kept at an unknown temple. Yeah, so kind of like how we go and venerate the relics of saints today. That's an old custom. I've never venerated a saint's toe. I'm going to look into that for next year. Yeah, we spoke about how Pyrrhus gave rise to the expression Pyrrhic victory, which we all know about. There he is in Yanina. This is the statue of Pyrrhus in Yanina. It keeps on moving around the city. Sometimes it's near the airport, sometimes it's not. It's as peripatetic as he is, and that's what I love about it. Now, Pyrrhus in his campaign into Italy was probably one of the last chances for the Greek world to check the advance of Rome into the Mediterranean. Now, the failure to fully exploit this opportunity while Rome was still only an Italian power and not a Mediterranean or continental power had immense consequences, obviously. The conquest of Magna Graecia, the Greek colonies in the south, by the Romans brought them into direct competition with Carthage, ultimately leading to the First Punic War, and then the establishment of Roman power throughout the Mediterranean seaboard over the next century. The failure of the various Greek kingdoms and city-states of the Hellenistic world to put on a united front against the Romans resulted in their absorption in the Roman Empire, like the kingdom of Pergamon, the Attalids. Rather than leaving the kingdom to a Greek, they bequeathed their kingdom to Rome, because that's just what we do as well. By 197 BC, Macedonia and many other Greek city-states became Roman client states. In 188 BC, the Seleucid army empire over in Asia Minor cedes most of Asia Minor and Syria cedes everything to Pergamon, who then, as we said, leaves the entire kingdom to Rome. Apparently, going back to Pyrrhus and his legacy, he wrote many memoirs and manuals on the art of war. These have since been lost, although according to Plutarch, Hannibal read them and thought they were really useful, and they received praise from Cicero. Pyrrhus was married 5 times. Yeah, Tafele. His first wife, Antigone, bore him a daughter called Olympias and a son called Ptolemy, the one that was killed in Sparta. And the second wife was the peripatetic Lanassa, who tended to stray. They had 2 sons, Alexander and Elenos, who were supposed to rule in Italy. The third wife was the daughter of Avdoleon, the king of Paeonia. His fourth wife was the Illyrian princess Byrsena, who was the daughter of King Vardilis, Illyrian. And his fifth wife was the daughter of Ptolemy Keravnos. The story of Pyrrhus was very common and popular in medieval times and in Renaissance times. And then he is one of the few Greek figures of antiquity that makes it into modern opera and modern stage. So Pyrrhus and Dimitrios is a 1708 adaptation for the London stage of the 1694 opera Il Piro e Demetrio by Alessandro Scarlatti, yeah? With a libretto by Adriano Morselli, and I managed bragging rights to obtain a copy the other day, and I'm kind of chuffed about that, which I'm sharing it all with you. Look what I've got. Pyrrhus and Dimitrios was also the second most successful opera in the early 18th century in London. It had 58 or 59 performances. Move over Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. We've got this in between 1708 and 1717, and the opera marked the London debut of the castrato Niccolò Grimaldi, the so-called Niccolini, who played Pyrrho. And how do you get a manly general being played by castrati? I don't know. Would have loved to have been there. Now, this is King Pyrrhus of Epirus in the Pantheon of the Immortals. It's by Eugene Delacroix, 1846, in the Luxembourg Palace in Paris. So, yeah, a grand legacy, an amazing man, and a man which we modern Hellenes seem to have forgotten a little bit, probably because there aren't many morals to be drawn from his story, apart from the fact of katsis, what we say in English, sit on your eggs, yeah, and be a little bit more focused. And here endeth the lesson. Thank you very much for your attention.
It's working now. Dean, what can I say? Entertaining as ever. Any questions from the audience? I knew it from an Italian.
Thanks, Dan. Both sides of the fence. Thank you. Thank you, Dean, as usual. Fantastic. A lot of fun. So he was more of a sprinter than a marathon man, and that seems to have been one of his downfalls. But was he a poor man's Hannibal and a really, really poor man's Alexander the Great? Because
Okay.
I'm just trying to think about his overall legacy.
Yeah.
What did he really achieve?
I don't think he can be compared to Hannibal. Hannibal was consumed with hatred and fear and anger, okay, at these Romans who were being really nasty to him and his people and his family.
But he was bloody successful.
He was amazing because he had a focus and a single focus.
Yep.
Alexander had a single focus, which was to glorify himself and be the greatest king ever, and to leave that kind of legacy of greatness in the way that he understood that term to be, not the way we understand. I think he's the most unsavoury figure. I don't think Pyrrhus knew what he wanted.
Right.
He was one of those kids that just don't apply themselves.
Right.
They got potential, but you just,
All right, just two other quick things, really, really quickly, if I may. One, I really loved your introduction about the fact that he might have been flame-haired.
He was a ranger.
Was he a ranger, or
I
was
reckon
it
he
more
was
about he had a fiery temper?
Well,
Was he
you
an
know what?
inflammatory figure? Because that was my understanding of one potential
I'm
reading.
saying it is a ranger.
All right, you're the boss. I'm going to go with
That's
that.
it, yeah.
And secondly, the tile that falls on his head that knocks him out and ends him so ignominiously. Is that where that scene from Ben-Hur comes from? The movie Ben-Hur?
Could possibly
Where
be.
the Roman consul's
Yeah.
going down, the lady knocks the thing on the head, bada bing, and it causes the whole
Well,
family.
look, there wasn't enough money left over in the budget to do the life of Pyrrhus, so I think they just inserted that scene in there, along with the dolphins.
I'm out of cheeky questions now. Thanks.
Is there a tile brand named after Pyrrhus?
I think there should be, I think that'd be great. Kind of like, you know how we have the Air Force school is called Scholi Ikaron? I never understood how that works because Icarus fell from the sky and died. Why are we sending our pilots to schools that, already predetermining their failure? But that's another story.
Okay. Any further questions?
That's it, we covered everything.
We can go all night and make it a Pyrrhic evening, but no? All right. A big round of applause for our speaker tonight.
Thank you.
Dean. And Dean, just a small gift from the community.
Show bag, I love it, thank you.